Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking about having to retake the bar multiple times. Your Bar Exam Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on barexamtoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking about having to retake the bar multiple times before passing. Well, how common is this? I mean, does this even really happen?
Oh, I think it happens a lot. And
Definitely.
I know. And if you look up those repeat or pass rates, it shows that sometimes it happens multiple times. I mean, it's really common to see someone have to take it 3 times, let's say, before passing.
Yeah, I think particularly in states like California, people may take it 6 times, 7 times, 8 times before they pass. I mean, the reality is once you have failed once or twice, the pass rates are fairly low. So I think people do sometimes have to keep taking it. But, if this is something, the situation you're in, you're definitely not alone. It happens with a lot of people. And, the reality is a lot of people, like you said, do overcome these issues and eventually go on to pass, which is great.
Yep. So I think there are a lot of reasons that people can get into the situation where they have to sit for the exam multiple times. We've been talking to a lot of people this week who are in this situation.
True. Very true.
Because California bar results just came out. So Alison, what are some of the reasons you've been recently hearing about people kind of getting into this rhythm of having to take the bar twice a year?
Well, I think there are a lot of different reasons. And I think one of the things people who are in this scenario really should sit with is figuring out which of the categories they might be in.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have just never been great at the things that the exam requires. They didn't really have these skills going into law school necessarily. They didn't develop these skills in law school. And now they're in a situation where, if they look back on their law school experience and we ask people, what was your first year particularly like? Because there's, some relationship between first year grades and bar success. And a lot of people say, it was really rough. And then my grades got better because I started taking paper classes or something. And I just, now I realize I never really got that exam writing skill that I need to be able to do the bar exam.
Yeah. I mean, I think this happens a lot, actually. And if you didn't do well your first year and, let's say you got out of taking those exam classes later on in your law school career, I think there can be some PTSD kind of going back to some of these subjects even
Right.
because you didn't feel a mastery of them the first time. You got to kind of put them to bed. And then it can be a shock to the system to go back to them and realize that you have to study classes that maybe some people still feel somewhat confident about, but you didn't feel confident about at all.
Right. And if you never learn these things to start with, it's kind of a lot harder to get back up to speed, particularly if you're doing a course, the kind of standardly paced bar course where you may just have a couple of days in the entire study period of a few months to actually work on this individual topic. So, if you're somebody who bombs Civ Pro, you're probably not going to be able to get back up to speed and really learn and master that material in a couple of days. So, I think this is one of those scenarios where people really need to evaluate what information do I know, like what skills do I have, and do I need more time than the average person to develop these going into the bar exam? And, I think if someone's listening to this and they're not yet in a situation where they haven't passed the bar, it's really great to kind of deal with this stuff beforehand. So, is your 3L year, that kind of thing. Work with whatever your school requires, work with a tutor, do whatever you need to do to kind of give yourself a leg up so that hopefully you don't find yourself in this position.
And if your school has, a bar success coordinator or an academic support office, before your bar season, you should go meet with them and kind of talk to them about your individual situation and say, I didn't do well 1L year. Yeah, my grades have gotten better. I'm nervous about the bar. Like, what should I be doing now? They may even have some recommendations of some school-sponsored programs or access to materials that you can get earlier, some classes that it may even be taught as part of your curriculum that you can take on the bar. There are definitely things that you can do to give yourself a leg up, but you should talk to people as soon as you can before starting the bar experience.
Right, because if you never learned how to write a law school exam, you're not going to have time to develop that skill set while you're also trying to memorize, 12, 15, whatever the number in your state is, different pieces of information that you need to know, different buckets, and also doing the multiple choice part. I think a lot of people also maybe aren't great at multiple choice in law school and kind of set that aside and don't really want to work on it. But that's one of those where, you can get like the strategies and tactics book or something and be working on that set of skills throughout your law school experience.
Yeah. So I think another common thing is just that some bar takers haven't studied or practiced properly or ever gotten any solid feedback on their work. I think you can really get caught in these large commercial program kind of machines where it's like you listen to all these lectures and you do 90% of the program and then they say that that's enough to pass and then you don't. And then they give you your program for free again. So you're like, rinse and repeat, I'm going to just do it again. And then you don't pass again. And then you could be looking at the third time, scratching your head, being like, but I don't know what else I'm supposed to do. I keep completing the same program. They told me if I did all of this work that I would pass. And the reality is you have to remember that these programs are designed as kind of one program to fit a certain profile of a student. And if that profile is not you, there's nothing wrong with feeling lost and that it's not going to help you get where you need to be.
Right. I mean, I feel like we often get people on the third try because they do the big program. It doesn't work. They do it again. It doesn't work again.
Yep.
And at that point, I think people are more open to saying, okay, let's really look at this. Is the third time of watching the same video lecture going to get me closer to passing? People are more open to feedback at that point that probably not. You got to do something differently. And I think, unfortunately, it's the practice piece that falls apart for a lot of people. And then the memorization. So, if you're not memorizing throughout your study period, you're probably memorizing too late. And if you're not doing practice really, literally on a daily basis, multiple times a day, you're probably not doing enough practice. So anyone who's sort of looking at the schedule and saying, okay, what do I need to be working on? I think the answer always is more active learning, more practice, and more feedback.
Yes. I mean, we've said this before on the podcast, but you got to do thousands of MBE questions.
Literally.
So literally, it sounds like a number where you're like, surely I'll do thousands. I'm like, no, you really need to do thousands.
Right. Like, no, we're talking at least 2,000.
2,000
minimum.
And you can't just do them. You have to evaluate them. You can't just say, wow, I did the questions and got 50% of them right. You want to try and study them too. So, it's very easy to get caught up in the busy work and to not do the heavy lifting, which is the 2,000 MBE questions. When you think about studying, for 8 to 10 weeks, if you're not writing every day, that's really not enough writing. But if you're writing every day, it starts to add up pretty quickly about how many essays you've done during your prep. And that practice is going to directly lead to you being able to perform better on exam day. So when you really start to sit down, you have to ask yourself, are you just outlining those essay answers? Because I think that's such a common thing. Well, I didn't write them out, but I outlined a bunch of them.
I did a lot of issue spotting.
A lot of issue spotting.
It's great. That's step one. Now try to move beyond that.
Right. But then I ran out of time during the exam. Or I spoke to someone today who, it was actually interesting because now we have this experience where people took the exam online and now they're taking it live again. And she appreciated the micromanaging of taking it online because you had to switch between each essay. I know different states had different ways. So, you couldn't really go over in the same way. But now you're back in person and you just get this block of time and it's like, good luck.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, she looked up and she only had 45 minutes to write her PT because she'd run out of time on the California exam where you get this 3.5 hour block. She didn't realize that she'd run out of so much time. So, I mean, there are a lot of things you have to focus on and the practice is so important in making sure you know how to execute each part of the test.
Yeah, I talked to someone with a similar situation on the MEE for the UBE who had done it remotely and said, oh, it was easier because it wasn't a 3-hour block. And then when I got the 3-hour block and I had 6 essays, by the last one, I was just totally underwater.
Yeah.
So, you've got to practice your timing is kind of the short answer on that. I think another bucket people fall into is they need some type of accommodations that they're either not getting, whether that be, a diagnosis that they never actually got, or for whatever reason, they're running into roadblocks with the bar exam, giving them the accommodations that they needed. And this can be really tricky, particularly for people who did not get accommodations in law school. I mean, that's an uphill battle, but sometimes people, either haven't applied for something that they maybe could qualify or whatnot. But, that's just something we see over and over is like, well, you're kind of at a disadvantage here. And is there any way that this can sort of go away?
Yes. I mean, I do believe that you should apply for accommodations if you believe you're entitled to them, even if you feel like it will be an uphill battle. You often can appeal. Even if you can't appeal for the administration you're going to sit for next, you could appeal for the next one. So it's important to just start the process, even if it's a new diagnosis. Also, I think it's important for people to understand that there are some accommodations that seem to be a little easier to access than others. So extended time is always going to be your trickiest, I believe. Right. But if you're studying or if you are struggling with the things we see a lot in students who are repeat takers, which Alison, I don't know if you'd agree, but adult ADHD,
Yep,
anxiety, right? A lot of debilitating anxiety. Then there are also medical type of accommodations that come up as well for other, physical disabilities or back problems. I've heard a lot of people who can't sit for long periods of time. Of course, we have breastfeeding, pregnancy, things like that. But for the ADHD and the anxiety, oftentimes it's easier to get access to a private or semi-private room. Mm-hmm. And I have heard from a number of students that they find that to be really helpful because you are not absorbing the emotion that is in these larger test centers, which can be very overwhelming.
Like 1,000 people stressed out and typing.
Right. And the typing, I hear over and over again, people with anxiety say that their mind goes blank. They look down and then they hear, the din of the typing around them. Right. And then it is just, it's very hard to start. So you can apply and have, your healthcare professional say this person needs 1.5 time, but maybe they also need a private room or they need kind of these other accommodations and they don't have to approve them all. So even if they won't give the extended time, something like a private room can still make a very big difference. Mm-hmm. So you do want to go ahead and apply and see what they believe you're entitled to level that playing field. So I think you just got to apply and see what happens.
I agree. And I often tell people the same thing, like, look, they may not give you time and a half, but even being in that room with 1 or 2 other people or by yourself is going to make a big difference. And if you could get that, maybe that's enough to get you the 10% extra points or whatever it is that you're not getting because you're so stressed out. You've got test anxiety and your mind's gone blank.
Yes. I also would recommend that if you are seeing a healthcare provider for one of these issues we've been talking about, and let's say you also take supporting medication, if you are struggling with the bar, make sure you talk to the healthcare provider about that. Because, there have been over the years situations where the timing of when you take your meds can make a big difference of whether or not you can perform for the entirety of the exam day. Or what if you're not sleeping? Or what if there's a side effect that is also making it difficult to perform at your best? I would go to your health care professional and say, do you know that I'm sitting for the bar exam? Because I'm continuing to sit for it and I'm struggling and I'm working on all these skills, but I'm still running into these roadblocks. Are there any other things that we need to talk about? And you might be surprised that they might have some other suggestions or tweaks to the way that they're treating you that may make this situation better. So it's a conversation to have with medical providers. It's also a conversation to have with any sort of therapist to talk about coping mechanisms. I think sometimes if you're working with a therapist, you have to ask them for coping mechanisms. You have to say, I'm practicing for this exam and my mind is going blank. What should I do?
Right.
And they
Because
should be able to
hopefully they
respond
have
with
some
suggestions.
ideas.
Yeah.
If not, we have some ideas. You can email us. You know?
Yes, exactly. Or you need a new
And we're
therapist.
we're not even therapists. So
Right. But, hopefully you can get some of that, you can get some of that feedback. But you oftentimes have to ask very pointed questions. And I think a lot of times people don't feel empowered to do that in healthcare settings. But this is one of those times where you're like, I'm living through this exam over and over again. You need to help me get out of this, this cycle. And they may have some things that they can suggest.
Yeah, it's kind of an all hands on deck type situation. Well, speaking of therapists, another set of things on our list is self-sabotaging behavior and people who don't necessarily really fundamentally want to be lawyers. And we see this a lot, actually.
Yeah. The ones who don't want to be lawyers really hurt my heart.
Yeah.
Because you're so invested at this point.
Well, but it's also kind of like, if it's, if everyone around you can see that maybe this is what's going on, maybe just admit it and move on.
Yeah. I mean, you have to really ask if you're going to be able to, put in the studying because, it's so sad when somebody keeps spending obscene amounts of money. The bar exam is an exceedingly expensive experience. Just to sit is so expensive. And if you don't have a reason in your gut you want to do it, it's likely not going to go well. And you're just going to find yourself into this kind of constant struggle.
Yeah, I would just much rather have somebody, take a break from preparing for the bar and invest some of that time and money and energy into talking with a therapist or a career coach or both, and really just kind of figuring this out. Because we see people, who've gone to great schools and just aren't able to pass. And at some point it does kind of come down to, are you sure that there's not something else going on here?
Yeah. Exactly.
It's sad that you went to law school and spent this time and money, but if this is not something you want to do, then just cut your losses and stop taking the bar.
Yeah, that's true. Which is sad, but you have to be honest if this is what you want to spend your time doing.
Yeah, it's just not doing anyone any favors to kind of half-heartedly prepare and then fail again and then do the same thing. It's like, you'd be better off just doing something else.
Right. Another thing that we see over and over again is that life stuff keeps happening. I definitely hear the moves and the weddings and COVID or people getting sick or other, kind of tragic events happen. I think there are kind of two ways to approach kind of this, the march of life complications, I think, which is one, you have to look if there are any avoidable life stuff that keeps happening during test prep. So that I would consider that moving, weddings, vacations, anything that is avoidable. If you find that it keeps coming up during bar prep, then you want to see if you're in the category of the self-sabotaging.
Right, why does this keep coming up?
Right, why does this keep coming up? Sometimes it can be just a string of bad luck. Life is complicated and you can really get nailed with a string of things happening. But if so, that is the type of situation where I think you might want to take a breather and get your life back together and then come back to the test, because you're just to constantly be on this kind of hamster wheel of failure can get really toxic after a while. If you're not able to give yourself a fair shake at studying, I just think it's time to press pause, come back to it when you have a better handle on what's going on in your life.
Yeah, and I think it's really hard, if somebody has someone in their family with a chronic illness or something, in the one hand, you just want to get this done. But on the other hand, if that's absorbing your time and your energy and you're not getting the bar done, then, again, sort of why spend the time and energy if you are pretty sure that you're not going to get a different result?
Yeah. And then we talk to a lot of bar takers who are in special situations. So these would be foreign trained attorneys, individuals for whom English is a second language. That is just going to make this bar more challenging. I've been talking to a lot of foreign trained attorneys the last couple of days. It is so hard to come learn all of this law cold, basically.
Right. And then write the exam in a different language that's not your native language. I mean, I full props to people who even attempt that, because it's definitely a lot.
Yeah, it's a ton. So if if you're finding, though, that you have been sitting for the test over and over again and not making any progress, I think that does require a moment to evaluate like how you've been studying. Is this a substantive knowledge of the law problem? Like what's really going on to hold you back? I think you want to ask some very thoughtful questions so you don't just, keep repeating the same cycle. We hope if it takes you a few times to get to where you need to be, that at least you're seeing an upward trajectory in those scores and that you're getting closer and closer.
Exactly. If you're seeing, one half of the exam moves up and then the next half moves up, and at some point, maybe for the third try, you just need to sort of put it all together. That's actually not a terrible situation to be in. Mm-hmm. But I think for people who are not seeing much progress, it can be really frustrating. And I think at that point, you've got to start doing something differently. I mean, I will say for most people, I don't think it's necessarily a lack of raw legal knowledge. If you ask people like what negligence is, they could probably tell you. I think there's specific instances like with foreign trained attorneys where there could be topics that they're just totally unfamiliar with. Mm-hmm. But generally speaking, if you've studied a couple of times and you've probably done a bar course, if you did most of it, you've seen most of this material. You may need to learn it differently in a more focused way, but it's unlikely that you're going to walk into to an essay and just have literally no idea what this is about.
Yeah, I think it's true. So if you find yourself in this situation, you failed at least twice, we do kind of recommend you kind of go through some options to try and change the pattern. So step one is you just got to do something different. You've got to come up with a different solution. And that can be a different kind of test prep. So oftentimes, you mentioned, you see I took Barbary, I took it again, and now I got to do something different. It's like that's such a common thing. So that can be working with a one-on-one tutor or using different materials, really evaluating all of the parts of the test and seeing if there's one part of the exam that's really, holding you down. You can do a lot of evaluation. We talk even about reading score reports in some earlier podcast episodes about kind of really trying to understand what's happening and come up with a plan for how to study differently. But usually just doing the same thing over and over again is not going to get you a different result.
Right. And I will say, sometimes people are like, oh, well, I did Barbary twice and now I'm going to do Themis. It's like, those are probably pretty similar options. Yeah. I'm not sure that's going to move the needle enough for you. Like all of these courses have the material you need to pass. Switching between one large course to another is probably not like different, actually.
Yeah.
So doing something differently in that scenario might mean like, well, I'm only going to study, say, off of like condensed outlines from Smart Bar Prep or something.
Yeah.
That would actually be a fundamentally different approach. Like I'm going to do Adapt-A-Bar or UWorld, which I've never done before. Or I'm going to work with a tutor or, somebody who can help me personally. These are all different options, but just switching to a different course is not probably different enough.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I think along those lines, if you are kind of unique in your situation, so let's say you have learning differences, you have unique accommodations, or especially if you're a foreign trained attorney, you may need personalized help to meet you where you are. And if that's the case, then find that personalized help. Find someone who can answer the substantive law questions that you may need to have answered, or who can come up with a strategy for using your extended time to the best of your abilities. There's a lot to be said for working with someone to create a personalized solution. But if you need something, developed just for you, then find that that's out there and get that help so you can figure out the best way for you to approach this test. Nobody will know if you take a 5-second break in the middle of your exam to sing yourself a happy song because it makes you feel better. Like if that's part of your personalized approach, that's great. Maybe that's, I know that sounds crazy, but I mean, we have students do lots of different things to break up the time to help with focus and things like that. You sometimes have to have someone brainstorm those solutions for you to break up the monotony and to help refresh yourself. So you've got to get personalized help to come up with unique solutions for you.
Right. I think you want to look at the non-academic side of things too and make sure you have support for, your mental health, your outlook, anything like that. Get these people on board because this is a stressful time. And it might be like having somebody who goes to the gym with you because you know that you need a physical outlet while you're studying, like all of these different things so that you can be in the best possible state. Because the reality is, for most people, this is a frustrating situation. And I think just like finding ways to handle that frustration as you keep studying can also be really important.
Yep, I think that that's true. You also have to be very realistic about whether or not you have the time, energy, and money to try again.
That's
so
reality.
if your job is insane, maybe not a great time to study right now. If you are completely burned out, maybe not a great time to study right now. And if you have driven yourself broke trying to pay for bar resources, then pause and work and get yourself to a situation where you feel like you can afford the help that you need to move this needle. There's nothing wrong with taking a break to regroup. I've seen it work really well over and over again.
The reality is people don't get results until if you're working, it's already almost too late to start studying again anyway. So I would much rather see people make a plan, to study for July instead of February and actually start early and spread it out and have the time that they need to have a reasonable chance of success versus like, oh my gosh, I just found out I failed and I need to jump back into studying tomorrow, but I'm also working full time and I have 2 kids and a dog and I can only study, 15 hours a week. It's like, well, you don't have time for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's okay. But you need to wait till you do have time for it.
Yeah. So like, if you're going to study 15 hours a week, that's not a problem as long as you are studying for say 4 to 6 months.
Right.
Not for 2 months.
And you need to be realistic about it too. We oftentimes, a lot of the process of how students work with us is they talk to Alison or myself, and then they decide to work with us. And they may have told us, I'm going to study part-time or full-time. And then when we reach out to develop their study schedule, we say, well, full-time means 4 hours a day. And we're like, no, it doesn't.
That's not full-time. Sorry.
It's not full-time. We wish it was, but it is not. So part of it is just really being honest with yourself about what you can give to the situation too. And that can be very hard. It can be hard to admit that you can't pull something off because there's not enough time. But that's life. It's worse to invest a bunch of money and energy into a situation that is not set up for success.
Right, exactly. Like you just need to make sure that you have a clear pathway. I mean, some of the things we've seen really work for people is just getting strategic about this test and your personal strengths and weaknesses. So, you might need to get better at the MBE, for example, even if you hate multiple choice. You might have to sit down and do a bunch of performance tests. But you can approach it as a test and see really where you might be able to collect points. And not, sometimes I think people fall into this trap of thinking of this as like a commentary on their abilities or their worth as a lawyer. And like, it's just a test. It has nothing to say about any of that.
Yeah.
But you can look at your results strategically and say, okay, based on my prior performances, where do I need to do better? Where do I have the potential to easily do better? And then figure out an actual plan for doing that.
Yep, I agree. So, I think we've seen a number of things work. This feels like an uphill battle, but it definitely can still be done.
Yeah.
But, you've got to really think about how you're going to approach this. And you've got to come up with a strategy about where you're going to collect the points. I really think that that's like such a big part of the strategic planning. It's like, it's a point collection game and you need more of them. Where do you need more of them? And then you've got to come up, somebody was asking me today for a scientific approach to it. I'm like, well, it's numbers,
math.
So you need more math. Basically, there aren't enough numbers. We need more of them. So we've seen a number of things work, of course, getting someone to kind of coach you through it seems to be a big difference maker for a lot of people, but also just approaching it at a test, making sure that you are grounded in the fact that this is not a comment on you, and then just doing the heavy lifting, that practice work, especially under exam conditions, is such a big deal.
Yeah, and the memorization, I think start early, rule statements, like you want to be memorizing very clear rule statements. You want to start this early. if you are not a native English speaker, it might be worth it to memorize key paragraphs, particularly on certain topics. Like everyone should memorize a key paragraph for community property, for example, in California, that you just write down at the beginning of your community property essay. And you want to focus on like shorter study materials and a level of detail that you can conceivably memorize. And so I think, there can be like a level of overwhelm here too. And like, you've just got to strip it down. You're not going to remember every single word. You've got to strip it down. This is why I like the Smart Bar Prep outlines, because they can help people prioritize. But if you are really solid on like the most important topics, you're probably going to be okay on most things. And like maybe there's an essay that doesn't go so well or whatever, but hopefully you've built up enough of a point reserve elsewhere through that analysis that you can actually survive a bad essay or two.
Yes. I would also say that you're going to have to weed through all the materials you've probably accumulated over your multiple attempts. And so, we hear a lot of this too, which is I have the Barbary books, the Themis outlines, the critical path flashcards. I've got Adapt-A-Bar. I've also played with UWorld. I've now, got these outlines and lean sheets and this. And I'm like, okay, cool. So we have to pick one.
Right. One, just one, pick one,
just pick one. And so part of, I think, coming up with the plan for making it your last time is to just say, okay, I've got to simplify this process. I'm going to put most of these materials in the closet. I'm going to start with the most, with the simple, most direct materials. And I'm going to do all this active learning and heavy lifting. And then I can go back. Those outlines aren't like gone, but you have to remove them because the overwhelm is really something you have to fight against.
Yeah. I mean, if we're looking at things that don't work, that's definitely one of the ones that we've seen is like looking for that magic bullet of the study of material that you're going to buy. Like, oh, well, if I just get this thing, I'm sure it's like, no, you've got the information. That's not the problem. I'm sure it's all there. If you have one source of information, you're good. And you have 10. So, that's not better. That's worse, actually. And I think, it can be hard to break old habits and approaches because they're comfortable. So if you're comfortable watching videos and checking things off, it's going to feel uncomfortable to do something else. But in the infamous post we have, it's like you've got to do the stuff that makes you uncomfortable because that's actually what moves the needle. And the one thing I will say for people who are working, I think another possible thing to consider that can really tank your study is if you can't take any time off of work at the end, I think even a couple of weeks can make such a big difference. So when people tell me, that they're not going to be able to take any time off before the exam, that always makes me very nervous for them.
Yeah. I mean, even if it's only the last full week, because then you have the weekend before, the 5-day work week, then 3 more days until the exam. It actually is quite if you can plow through, it's actually even just that is pretty significant. Yeah. But to finish work on Friday and take a test on Tuesday is really challenging.
Yeah, I think you just don't have time to get into the mindset of like the memorization, the practice, the stamina, and just be in the headspace to really go in and do that is so tough.
It is really tough. So, being realistic. And again, if you don't have the vacation time and it's not possible to take that time off work, then maybe you should delay. Take a break.
Right.
Come back to it the next
vacation
season.
Time.
Yep.
Because, it's just so frustrating for someone to study like intensively while working and then get to the very end and not have any focused time. And then that becomes the reason they fail. It's like, really, that's very disappointing.
Yep. Well, Alison, we think we're about out of time. Any final thoughts?
I guess my final thought would be, I know that this is a very frustrating situation to find yourself in. And I think anything you can do to sort of emotionally take that step back and look at this more logically and just more objectively and say, okay, where am I doing well? Where am I not doing so well? Where do I have the possibility to make up points? And then having a real strategy for doing that, it is doable. We do see people pass after failing many, many, many times. And it's always really exciting when they do. But I think you just have to sort of treat it as a test and look for the points.
Yeah, I think that that's all right. And I think we do see it happen. I think it can feel like nobody has done it before, but people do pass after a cycle of failures, but they usually pass after doing something different or taking a break or regrouping or setting themselves up for success in a different way. So I feel like that you can really get into this idea that it's impossible because you look at these statistics, which are so miserable in most of the jurisdictions, but you can come out on the other side of this, but it does take some heavy lifting to get there.
Right. And even with the terrible pass rates after you've taken it, X number of times, there's still someone who's taken it that many times passing, and that person could be you.
Yep, that's true. All right. Well, with that, we are out of time. I want to take a second to remind you to check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of helpful tips to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. You can also find information on our website about our courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs to support you as you study for the UBE or California bar exam. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you are still in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Allison at lee@barexamtoolbox.com or allison@barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always reach us via our contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.